I believe Trump demonstrated you could go around the party. You could decapitate a party temporarily. And that's plausible, apparently. I wouldn't have said so, but it is apparently plausible.
Well, he didn't go around it. He went through it. He took it over, right?
Yeah, I would say he went around it and, stepped in front of it and became its head, which, the thing is, Bernie was in a position to do the same thing in the Democratic Party.
Same thing, but he held back a bit. Trump went all out. Sanders held back a bit.
Well, I don't know either, man, but I would say the difference is that Trump is the kind of player who understands everything to be a legitimate move in the game. Mm-hmm. And Sanders is constrained by
his morals,
some moral code that limits what moves he can make, which allowed Hillary Clinton, who I believe is much more Trump-like, will play any move as a legitimate move in the game. It allowed her to drive him into irrelevance and, frankly, to paint people like you and me as Bernie bros. Remember that?
Yeah. Crazy.
Bernie bros just came out of nowhere. It was just like, wait, suddenly this is about being a dude? I thought this was about like working people getting the shaft, and somebody wants to fix that.
They had to paint a working class movement as sexist. I mean, and racist, and so bad. And the funny thing is, and it's reused. It's used every cycle practically. I mean, apparently in the 2008, Hillary Clinton campaign pushed this narrative of the Obama boys online.
Yeah, that's gross.
Yeah.
Well, but okay, this actually then is right back in your area of expertise, because it looks to me like there's a set of epithets that are so terrifying to people. They're socially terrifying. Things that if you are accused of them cause most people to buckle because they do not know how to field the accusation, right? The thing that captured people's attention about my confrontation at Evergreen was that the students said I was a racist. These are students I'd never met, by the way. Mm-hmm. These students that I'd never met said I was a racist. And I said, no, I'm not. And most people couldn't imagine how a white professor was going to survive just simply saying, no, that's not true, right? So the point is, there was a question about, can you figure out how to stare down a bad accusation, right? And that bad accusation can be conspiracy theorist, it can be anti-vaxxer, it can be racist, it can be transphobe, it can be Bernie bro, it can be apparently Obama boy, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess the point is, at some point, it's a single trick. There's an epithet. It sounds like the end of your social life if it gets appended to you. And so everybody is bending over backwards to make sure it doesn't get directed at them, right? If they keep doing this, and then it turns out that A, a certain number of us figure out how to stare it down, and that B, the people who stare it down turn out to be safer or insulate themselves from some kind of authoritarian oppression, then at some point people are going to realize, they're epithets. They don't mean anything, right? They've robbed these. I mean, some of these things, we need to be able to accuse racists of racism, right? How dare you burn that one up, accusing people who aren't guilty of it of being racist? You've just let all the racists off the hook, right? How could you, right? You want to abuse Nazi? You want to let Nazis off the hook? Because that's what you're doing, right? So I don't know. What do you think? Are the epithets eventually going to lose their power when one after another turns out to be political garbage?
I think they are losing their power, but it might just be, I worry that it's just, my network, recognizes that it's bullshit, but there's still huge bubbles of the population that, the one of the bigger ones, the Democratic Party bubble, a lot of anybody that's still part of that party, they still believe that stuff, that, they take the bait every time. Otherwise they wouldn't be in the Democratic Party cult anymore. I mean, I understand you're registered, but we're not really in, you don't identify as Democrats.
That's the question. When I hear that my concern over mRNA vaccines is going to make me an untouchable from the point of view of New York Times reading, NPR listening Democrats, my feeling is that's a zero cost, right? With the exception of some very old people who have read the New York Times, who read it back when it was a newspaper, who listened to NPR back when it was public broadcasting, before these things were pure propaganda outlets. All right, there's some people, some very old folks who can't seem to get over the loss of those properties and they still believe in them. But in terms of one's interactions in life generally, apart from their older relatives, I don't need to make sense to New York Times readers. Those people are inherently confused. In fact, if I'm running my life around trying to make sense to a New York Times reader, then I'm going to end up like Bernie Sanders, where suddenly I'm useless.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess the point is, I think a lot of the threat is in people's minds, that the cost of actually confronting these epithets is small, because frankly, a lot more people are aware that these are nonsense than you are led to believe.
Yeah. And it, I mean, honestly, it almost gives you more credibility now, because it shows that you are perceived as a threat to, the establishment. And I mean, I'll say, when I was canceled, it did seem like I was being, shamed and attacked by more people than it actually was. I mean, privately, many people were, knew it was bullshit, and they sympathized with me privately. So that was, I mean, it's a shame more people couldn't say it publicly, but that did at least, show me that this is just, appearance on the surface. Most people, or at least a lot of people, can see through this. And I guess every time someone just responds rationally, calmly, like you did, and just asking, basic questions, then they go on to expose themselves as, often the ones who are bigoted. And it's funny, like, I mean, that's the way hatred is expressed now, is by accusing the hated of being hateful. And when, like I said, when you respond as you did, just like calmly and clearly, it really exposes the scam.
Yeah, the more I think about it, when I was confronted by students, again, people I had never met, leveling an accusation that I personally knew had no merit, the thing that, well, the first thing is, they confronted me with my class, people I did know. And I think, it took me months to realize this, but I think they were expecting my class to defect on video, right? Because, of course, students accusing a white professor of racism, in 2017, surely you're going to find people saying, yeah, and, you're going to have lots of disgruntled students or whatever. And of course, not a single one of my students defected, because they knew me and they knew it was garbage too. And all of the students that I had had in years prior didn't defect either, for the same reason. But it was also true that in class we were talking about racism and where it comes from and what it has to do with evolution and what needs to be true in order for it never to rear its ugly head again, you know. And I also had my own history. I could look back at my own history and I could check, you know, do they have a point? Mm-hmm. No, they don't have a point. I can prove they don't have a point. So what I'm getting at is I was in a very unusual position when they leveled that accusation at me, which was that I knew no matter how many rounds we went, there was nothing for them to find. They weren't going to find a shred of evidence that this was true. And I had a whole lot of evidence that they knew nothing about from my earlier history that I could have brought to bear if need be to establish that their accusation was nonsense. But who has that? That's rare.
Yeah.
And what they're doing by effectively creating hyper-awareness of race at every moment is preventing people from living a life that could generate that evidence. I was lucky to generate lots of interracial interactions, you know, in a context where everybody knew that the objective was to make race less important, right? Every good person understood that race had been too important and that it needed to become unimportant, and that although you can debate where we are relative to a colorblind society, that's where we should be headed, right? So in that world, I had lots of experiences that I could point to. Somebody who grew up 20 years later would have had experiences in a world where race was always charged, right? And so the point is, part of the diabolical aspect of the strategy here is that it prevents people from living a life that would tell them that what they were being accused of was nonsense. So I think lots of people have self-doubt. Maybe people are shouting that I'm a racist, then maybe I am. That's what they think.
No, really. I mean, it's, especially people who are, you know, open-minded, which is, I think, a good, important type of person to have. And, you know, be like, oh, like you said, oh, did I do something wrong? And honestly, like I, you know, asked myself that when I was being, all these accusations were being hurled against me. And it happened so fast, Bret. Like I was given no time to even defend myself. Like, and I mean, I had drafted an apology. The Sanders campaign leaked it to a report. I said, this is for you to say, yes, I'm happy to resign because, you know, I don't want to work with, I already explained why I had my like reservations about working for them, when they were really going to give me creative control. But anyway, it got, so the apology, which I said was still just a draft, gets leaked to the press. But anyway, after, and that was all within like an hour of being pressured to resign. And within an hour, I had no time. I looked back at the videos. I was like, that ain't bad. That really ain't bad. And so it is kind of maddening anyway. That just, but what makes it so diabolic, as you were saying, in addition to what you were saying, is that it is so, like, you can't prove a negative, right? Or it's very difficult to.
Yep. It's very difficult to, which is part of what they count on. And they also count on the game theory, which is they point this super weapon at you. And the idea is, we'll pull the trigger unless you demonstrate your subordination to us, in which case we'll move on to somebody else. And so staring it down is terrifying. Not staring it down causes it to spread. It becomes effectively contagious because each person capitulates and drives them on to the next person. And at some level, you just got to stand up and say, no, that's nonsense.